Okay, so picture this, right? You're finally cleared of this crime, something you never even did in the first place. Years of your life just gone poof. What do you even do next? I mean, how do you even begin to put your life back together, to get back what was taken from you? That's what we're getting into today. We're taking a deep dive into the world of legal remedies for those who are wrongly convicted in the Philippines.
And get this, it's not like in some countries where it's just a quick, oops, sorry, and a pat on the back. This system they have, it's surprisingly complex, you know? Like they're really trying to make things right.
So by the time we're done with this deep dive, we'll all understand exactly how the Philippines tackles this whole thing. It's a complex issue, wrongful imprisonment. And we'll really see what kind of impact these legal remedies can have on someone's life, after they've been through something like that.
Yeah, what's really fascinating about the Philippines is that they take this really holistic approach, you know? It goes way beyond what you might find in other countries where they might just focus on releasing someone and maybe giving them some basic compensation, but that's about it.
Okay, now you got me hooked. So how does this holistic approach really work? What are the legal nuts and bolts of it all?
Well, it's all grounded in these three main pillars of Philippine law. So first up, you've got the Civil Code, specifically Articles 19, 20, and 21.
Okay.
These articles, they're all about making sure your personal rights are protected, rights that are totally violated when someone's wrongfully imprisoned, right?
Yeah, it's like you have the right to be free, to have a good reputation, to feel safe, not constantly looking over your shoulder. All of that gets, like, trampled on when you're wrongfully convicted.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. And what's really important here is that those articles, they also say that if those rights are violated, you deserve to be compensated.
Right. Makes sense.
Then there's the Revised Penal Code, and Article 29 is the big one here. It states straight up that if you get acquitted of a crime, you've got the right to have all your civil rights fully restored. And we're not just talking about letting you out of prison. This is about getting your life back, you know?
Right, because you can't just pretend that those years of someone's life just disappeared. There's so much more to being clear than just walking out of prison.
100%. And then you've got the rules of court. Think of these as the how-to guide. They connect those rights with actually getting them back. The rules of court, they lay out the whole process of, how you go about filing a civil action for damages, which ensures there's a clear, defined path to actually getting justice.
So it's like you got the big ideas, the principles in the civil code and the penal code, and then the rules of court are like, okay, here's how you actually use those principles to get what you deserve.
That's a really good way to put it. It's like a three-legged stool. You need all of them for it to work. And together, these laws, they create a system that's meant to be, on the one hand, really comprehensive, but also, maybe even more importantly, something people can actually use.
Yeah, I mean, that's reassuring, at least on paper.
Yeah.
But has it actually worked in real life? I mean, are there any cases where this is actually played out like it's supposed to?
Of course. There are actually quite a few examples. Let's look at one from 1997. In this case, the prosecution, they just couldn't prove that the person was actually guilty. And because of that, beyond a reasonable doubt standard, the whole cornerstone of a fair justice system, the person was acquitted. This case is a good example of the system working the way it should,
So the system did its job, that time at least, which is obviously how it should be. But what about what happens next? Like, what happened to this person after they were released?
That's where those legal remedies we were talking about come into play.
And that's what we're going to get into next.
That's what it's all about, right? It's not just about hearing those words, not guilty, and then that's it. It's about what happens next. How do you even start to rebuild your life after going through something so incredibly unfair?
It's a really important point. You're right. You've hit on something really crucial about how the Philippines handles this whole idea of damages that someone can try to get back.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about throwing money at the problem and hoping it goes away. It's about recognizing just how deeply someone is harmed by being wrongfully convicted.
So you're saying it's about more than just like financial compensation.
Right. One of the types of damages someone might go after is what's called moral damages. And this is all about getting compensation for that emotional distress, the mental anguish, the psychological trauma of being locked up for something you didn't do.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
Think about it. The fear, the despair, feeling totally helpless. Moral damages are meant to address that invisible suffering.
It's like you're not just losing time, you're losing your peace of mind, that feeling of security, maybe even your faith in the justice system as a whole.
Exactly. And then on top of that, There are exemplary damages. And these go beyond just compensating the individual. These are about sending a message. It's like the system is saying, look, this kind of injustice, it won't be tolerated, and we're going to punish those who are responsible.
Oh, interesting. So it's like holding the system accountable, showing that there are real consequences for getting it wrong. What about the practical side of things? I mean, if someone's locked up, they can't exactly go to work, right? Their career is basically put on hold while they're fighting to clear their name.
Right, you've got a point there. And that's where what we call actual damages come in. This is about getting financial compensation for things like lost wages, medical expenses, any actual tangible losses that someone suffered because they were wrongfully convicted.
So it's like trying to, as much as possible, make things right financially to sort of restore what was lost as best as the system can. But even with all of these legal remedies in place, it can't be easy, right? Even if you've got the law on your side, navigating the system has got to be incredibly tough.
Are you thinking about entering law school in the Philippines? The Handbook for Incoming Law School Students is your essential guide to navigating the journey. From choosing the right undergraduate degree to mastering case readings, exam prep, and even the bar exam, this concise handbook has everything you need to succeed. Get tips on managing stress, understanding the Socratic method, and more. See the description to purchase your copy today and start your law school journey with confidence for only 149.99 pesos only.
Are you ready for law school? Get your copy of
You're absolutely right. Access to justice isn't as simple as just having laws written down somewhere. It's about how those laws actually work in the real world, how people can actually use them.
Because you could have the best intentions in the world when you're writing these laws, but if they're impossible to understand or the process is so difficult to get through, are they even actually helpful?
Precisely. And one of the biggest hurdles is this thing called the burden of proof. Remember earlier when we were talking about that beyond a reasonable doubt standard in criminal trials?
Yeah, I remember.
Well, when it comes to these civil cases, where someone is trying to get damages for being wrongfully convicted, that burden shifts. It's now on the individual to prove that they were actually wrongfully convicted.
Wait, so even though they were found not guilty in the criminal case, they now have to prove it all over again to get compensation?
Yeah, that's unfortunately the way it is. And it's often easier said than done. I mean, evidence can get lost, memories fade, and gathering all that information again, it takes time, it takes money, it's a lot.
That sounds incredibly daunting, like an uphill battle, even after everything they've already been through.
It definitely can be. And then there's the emotional toll it takes. Imagine having to relive that trauma, to tell those stories again in court. It's incredibly difficult.
It's heartbreaking. It's like they're being victimized all over again just by trying to get what they deserve. And I imagine there are financial hurdles too, right?
You're right. Legal battles are expensive. It's very likely that they've already drained their savings fighting those initial charges, and now they're hit with even more legal fees, all while trying to put their lives back together, find a job, and reintegrate into a society that might still be suspicious of them.
It makes you realize that justice, even when it prevails, can come with a really hefty price tag.
Yeah, it's something to think about. And it highlights how important it is not only to have a strong system of remedies in place, but also to address why these wrongful convictions are happening in the first place.
Now we're talking. Because, I mean, as important as those remedies are, wouldn't it be better to prevent these things from happening at all? What are some of the things that contribute to these wrongful convictions, not just in the Philippines, but around the world?
One major factor is eyewitness misidentification. Our memories, they're not perfect. And unfortunately, studies have shown that even though eyewitness testimony can be really convincing, it can also be surprisingly unreliable.
That's a little scary, honestly, because you're right. We tend to think of someone saying, I saw it with my own eyes as like the most convincing evidence there is. But maybe it's not as ironclad as we think.
You got it. And then there's this whole issue of false confessions. Now, this might sound hard to believe, but people can actually be tricked, pressured, manipulated into confessing to crimes they didn't commit.
That's chilling. It makes you wonder, like, how many people are in prison right now based on a confession that wasn't even real? What else contributes to this global problem of wrongful conviction?
We can't forget about forensic science. And while it definitely plays a crucial role in a lot of investigations, there's always that chance of human error. Evidence can be misinterpreted, there can be misconduct.
So it's not as simple as the evidence speaks for itself. There are people involved at every step, and people make mistakes, people have biases. This is all feeling pretty heavy right now. Is there any hope in all of this?
There is, actually, and we'll get to that next time. But it's really important to understand the problem first. That's the only way things are actually going to change.
I'll be honest, this is heavy stuff. When you really think about these systemic issues about innocent people being locked up, it makes you wonder, what can we even do? Is there any way to fix something that seems this broken?
There's always hope.
Mm.
And acknowledging the problem, like we're doing right now, that's the first step. But beyond that, there are concrete things we can do to address these issues. Create a system that's actually just.
Okay, so less doom and gloom, more solutions. I'm all ears. What can we do about these root causes of wrongful convictions?
Well, let's start with that first one we talked about. Eyewitness misidentification. One really effective reform is using what's called blind or double-blind lineup procedures. This means the officer who's running the lineup, they don't know who the suspect is, so there's no way they can accidentally influence the witness.
Makes sense. You'd be taking away that chance of bias, even if it's unintentional. What about those false confessions? How do we stop those from happening in the first place?
One crucial step is requiring every interrogation to be recorded, video, or audio. That way you have a clear record of what went down, and you can see if any pressure tactics or coercion were used.
Yeah, cameras don't lie, right? A recording can tell you so much more than just a written statement. So what about forensic science? How do we ensure those results are as reliable as possible?
Strengthening the standards for forensic science is key. This means things like making sure labs are properly accredited, that analysts are well-trained, certified, and we need to tackle those backlogs in testing so evidence is processed efficiently.
So basically, investing in the system, making sure every single piece of evidence is handled with extreme care.
Exactly. And then there's prosecutorial misconduct. We need strict ethical guidelines for prosecutors, independent oversight to make sure those guidelines are actually being followed, and real consequences when they're not.
It's like that old saying, power corrupts. You need those checks and balances, especially in a system that's supposed to be all about justice.
Couldn't agree more. And finally, and this is a big one, we can't forget about legal representation. Everyone, no matter how much money they have, deserves access to quality legal help. That means supporting public defenders, legal aid organizations, and exploring different models, like holistic defense.
Holistic defense, that's a new one.
Yeah, so that's about providing more well-rounded support for defendants. So not just focusing on the legal stuff, but also any underlying issues, things like substance abuse, mental health, that sort of thing.
Because everyone deserves a fair shot, right? Justice shouldn't just be for those who can afford it. It feels like we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've talked about the Philippines and how they try to remedy wrongful convictions, a system that seems pretty good on paper but still has a way to go in practice. But we've also talked about hope, about the potential for change, for real systemic reform that could stop these injustices from happening in the first place.
We've only scratched the surface, really. But my hope is that this deep dive has given you a starting point, a way to understand this complex issue, and some food for thought as we continue to grapple with wrongful convictions and their impact on individuals and society.
If there's one thing I'm taking away from all of this, it's that getting out of prison, it's not the end of the fight for someone who is wrongfully convicted. It's about accountability, it's about reforming the system, and ultimately it's about creating a world where everyone has a real shot at justice.